Excellent.
Hi, everybody. It's Alexa here with Laura Bird, and we're really excited to have you tonight on this follow-up webinar with us sharing around your questions and your concerns and your wonderful openness around the topic of losing our beloved the beloved animals in our lives and how to navigate that transition more easily, gracefully, all those things. So really excited to have you here on the call today. And essentially, I'll go through a little bit of the logistics for today, what we're thinking. This is a little bit more of a free-form call, so we'll be flowing with it. But we wanted to, before we got started into the rest of the material, we wanted to just revisit the content of our last webinar, which was the 5 things our animals want us to know about death and dying. And we just wanted to kind of like touch back into those places before we began. And I also wanted to introduce myself. I'm Alexa Linton. If you don't know me, I'm here in Canada on Vancouver Island. And this is the lovely Laura Bird. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself here?
Yeah, I'm Laura Bird. I'm an animal communicator or animal translator. And both Alexa and I, in the work that we do, which is a little bit kind of outside the square, healing, spiritual work with humans and animals, have got really interested in the process of death and dying, because I think animals have a role to play in how we as humans learn about it. It's often one of the first places we learn about death and dying is through our animals. And they are the most amazing spiritual teachers because they're so natural, because they're not encumbered by culture or belief systems. They're very natural. They're very primal. So, yeah, so I guess that's how we got to this. And Alexa's written an amazing book called Death Sucks.
Yep.
Kind of the catalyst for all of this, which was really designed to help people navigate the transition with their animals, navigate how to go through the death process, which is often one of the most difficult things we face with animals. And then, so was it last week? A couple of weeks ago now. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I'm just thinking, also just catching anyone up that might not have been on the last webinar. We ran a webinar that looked at 5 key things that animals wanted us humans to know about death and dying. And we got such amazing questions that we thought our next one, rather than be like a repeat or go over the same material, although we will revise it, would be to address your questions, because we had some great questions and we just ran out of time. So
we went over by like 20 minutes. So yes, yeah. And today our hope is to, after we revisit, to really open up the floor here for your questions. So we'd love you to sit and percolate on that a little bit about, what are your sort of those little niggly questions that, as an animal lover, or just sitting in the back of your mind, just like Jack was sharing a little before the call, like those little things that are like, oh, I'm just not quite sure about this, or this thing is just really bugging me about this transition, and I'm not clear. Because for myself and Laura, this is where, weirdly enough, we hang out a lot here with our clients, with our both human and animal, and so we'll be sharing from that. I think it's a cumulative like 25 years of experience between both of us of supporting around this transition and what that looks like, and remembering throughout the call a couple of things, and I want to lay this out. So your feedback, your questions, your concerns are very important to us. Please don't hesitate to pop them into the chat. And let us know what's going on for you. If you did ask a question in the last webinar, we ask that you re-ask it in the chat, because we didn't realize, or I didn't realize with the technology, that we would lose the chat box and all the things in the chat box. And I didn't take the time to jot down the questions before we ended the webinar last time. So if you can remember what you had asked, we would love it if you would open that door up again for us again. Also, we do realize that this is a very emotional topic. So we recognize that there's going to be resistance that comes up. There might be emotions that arise. We recommend having maybe a glass of water and definitely some tissues on hand. Thank you. Like a little flight attendant.
I can't reach it through the screen though.
We would though. At the Death Sex workshop that we do, we have copious amount of tissue boxes on hand for such things.
Yeah, and yet there's still never one handy when you need it.
No, absolutely not. So we just recommend during this time to really be present to, if there is resistance arising, if there is, some inner conflict coming up, recognizing that's really, really natural. This is a subject that's quite taboo in many cultures around the world. And the fact that we're getting on here and having a conversation about it is really amazing. And it also takes a lot of courage to show up. So just really honoring each and every one of you for being here right now and joining us in this journey. We know, all of your animals are very happy that you're here and making this commitment to just being more connected on your own terms with what this process is really all about. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. And I'm watching those questions come through.
Yes.
And there's some fantastic ones. And I know that one of the big things that we do want to talk about on this webinar is the questions that came up around like traumatic death and when animals die young, or, there's sort of a big difference between an animal dying when they're very old and an animal dying in a tragic circumstance or in an accident or when they're very young. And that's definitely one of the big topics that we want to talk about today as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, Michelle, for bringing that up again, and Valletta as well, and Juanita too. That sense of, so do they know what's going on? And I'm really interested in addressing this, because I think for many of us, this is where kind of the shifty resistance stuff comes in, because it feels there's a lot of feels in this place. So so thank you for being open and sharing on this level, and recognizing that we will be diving in if there's a ton of emotion coming up throughout the call. Laura and I will save some space at the end to do a bit of a session to help shift that if people are open to it. So we'll kind of play that right here as we go along here today. Yeah, cool. So why don't we, Laura, just dive into these 5 things that we covered last time, sort of on a briefer, a little bit more briefly than we did last time.
I'll try to zip it. Yeah.
Concise, so that we can catch everybody up, and if there is, pieces around this that maybe we didn't have a chance to.
This might remind people of their questions from last time a little bit.
Totally.
So the first thing that we looked at last time was this idea that animals' lifespans are different to human lifespans, and that the sort of the contracts or the relationships that we have with animals, this is a major feature of it. Most animals don't live as long as we do, and actually the roles that they play in our lives as a result is more than just them being our child. Like a natural child relationship is that they would outlive you, whereas animals aren't designed to outlive you. There's, biologically it's built into them that they have a shorter lifespan, so that basically places them in a role where, yes, sometimes they are our babies, but sometimes they're our guides and they're our teachers. And most of the time in the hero's journey, in most stories, the hero outlives the teacher or outgrows the teacher. So animals are actually leaving us to go some of the journey or the rest of the way on our own with the things that they've learned, that they've left us to learn. And I think there's a huge piece in there as well about them actually just teaching us about death, because it's one of our major fears, the fear of mortality, the fear of our own death, a level of discomfort with that. And a lot of the time we'll confront those things and explore them and process grief around death with animals that we wouldn't otherwise. And actually, I think they give us an opportunity to process grief more regularly, because I don't think humans aren't great at grief. We're not really good at it. And a lot of the time when you feel a little bit of grief around one thing, it actually tugs on and brings up all that emotion, all the tide of other sadness and emotion, and it will bring that up for us. And then as we feel the grief that we're feeling with this particular animal, it allows us to clear grief that is it's accumulated within us as well. And I think it's one of the big gifts they give us.
Absolutely. And that is actually one of the things that we talked about here. I'm just going to skip one a little bit here, because it's like the right space, kind of trajectory for today, but, recognizing how important grief is. So in my book, I had a couple dear friends of mine, Celeste and Bradley, share on the grieving process they went through for their dog, Sasha. And it was really interesting at the time. My friend Celeste is what she calls herself a grief enthusiast. So grief is like her big thing, the big thing she works with and helps people with. And when she started to do that, I was a little like, what's that about? Because we do have a hard time going into grief. And what I've recognized through animals and through people that are fully honoring that grief is that it is an incredible form of love. It shows, this, the great gift that our animals brought to our life, and really allows us to fully process and come to a place of integration and receiving that gift on the level that, most of us would really want to. So that was really big. And one thing we see especially in certain species, horses being one of them, is that they will literally stand over the body. So in wild herds and things, they'll stand over the body sometimes for quite a chunk of time. My sense is like sometimes days, and elephants are the same way. And they're going through a grieving process at this time and working through these pieces for themselves before, moving on to the next thing. And so seeing that and recognizing in our culture, and it's that kind of, okay, I got to get back to it. We have I have this much time to process and grieve, and then I'm back in the rat race, getting going, heading on out, right? So to honor that spaciousness that's necessary often to go into that grief is a really beautiful thing, because it allows, as Laura said too, it's connected to all the grief that we've felt that's unprocessed. So it's a powerful healing tool for ourselves as well. Okay, so there's that.
I don't think that grief ever is completely gone. And that's the other thing as well. If there's a part of you that still tears up when you remember those beloved animals of yours, it's not because you haven't processed your grief properly. It's just because there's always that, there's always like a little bit there. And so, to be kind to yourself as well about that, I think, because sometimes we actually have a thing about that we shouldn't cry in our culture, that it's sort of like people apologize for crying. Oh, I'm so sorry. And actually it's really fine, it's actually really fine.
Yeah, it's actually supernatural. Yeah.
Because we cry when we feel deep joy and love as well as sadness. So I think sometimes when we remember those animals and the tears still come, it's actually a really beautiful thing, because it's love, and it's a very deep moment of connection.
Yeah. And I think that with grief, sometimes we can experience this, I need to get rid of this grief. I need to not feel this grief. And I love, Laura, that you put that it doesn't really ever go away. So there's always going to be that little pang of remembering and missing, and, that little bit of that moment that we had doing this or that, when I think of something that I just love doing with an animal of mine, it's natural that tears spring to our eyes, and we get I miss them, because we always will. They were just an incredible, absolutely pivotal point in our lives. And so that's really something to recognize, is you don't have to push that away. It's not something you need to fix or heal. It's actually like a part of our evolution into being deeply feeling, loving beings that had a beautiful experience with another being that really, really resonated with us, and that we deeply miss, and that we have deep love for, right? So yeah.
And like I've seen people kind of, do this work around death to the point that they kind of go, oh well, it's like, it's nothing, it's not the end, and it's not, but it is a transition. And when we're here in the physical, and when we're being human, our emotions and like being okay with those emotions, and being okay with being human, being alive, being in this body is at times uncomfortable. And our job is not to kind of like get to the point where we're like so zen about everything that it's like we feel nothing, and we're meant to always feel something. I think that's healthy.
Totally.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. So that was number 3. We skipped one.
About animals feeling grief. And so the second point was a really like a really key one, I think, because so many of us that love our animals, and especially because we're in roles as guardians and carers, we have this feeling of guilt sometimes, like we've done something wrong, that it was our fault. And also when we start to get like spiritually aware, and we recognize how much our animals mirror us, and how often we experience similar emotions, we experience similar symptoms, we start to think, oh my God, this is my fault. I've like fucked up in some way, because if I could just clear this stuff, my own emotional baggage, then my animal wouldn't have these symptoms. And so number 2 is really, it is not your fault. It is not your fault. Yes, sometimes animals share symptoms with us, and yes, sometimes the thing that they're going through, or the thing that they even appear to die from, may be something that we struggle with in ourselves. But actually, it is such an intricate part. Like when I've asked dogs about this, because the common thing is people say, hey, like tell my dog they don't need to take that on for me. And you tell the dog, and the dog goes, well, but that's my job. What do you mean, like, not to do that? That's what I'm here to do. They're like, may as well cut my legs off, like,
Yep.
And they have this really deep sense of duty around that. And a lot of the time they have their own reasons why they are sharing in that with you. We shouldn't be so egoic as to think it's all about us. They have their own reasons why they're on that journey with us, and why they're sharing in that particular energy with us. But also my experience is that if there is any dysfunctional energy in an environment, the animals will help to harmonize that environment by collapsing that energy. So, I spoke last time a little bit about my dog Grace, and some of the throat stuff that she has cleared for me. And so number 2 is really about, it's not your fault. Everyone's situation is unique. But if there's any sense that you have that this is in some way your fault, or you're to blame, the animals really want you to know that they're not. And even if you can't kind of quite see how that's the case, I promise you that it's absolutely not your fault. They're going to die anyway. We all are. Yeah. And they try to be of the greatest service in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Whew, thanks, Laura.
No problem.
The fourth thing here is around this idea that, animals are really cognizant of this circle of life, right? It's something that as humans we've tried to kind of step out of a little bit. Like, maybe I can beat it, maybe I don't have to age, maybe I'll never die. Whereas animals are very much, they're very real about this process of their existence, that at some point they're going to meet their mortality, and they're, from what I've experienced with all the animals that I've helped with transition, they're quite good with it for the most part. They're quite good with it. And we will chat a little bit about the ones that are not as much so a little later, because there are animals that I've met that have had, things cut short that are like, excuse me. So we will chat more to that. But by majority, animals are easier in that transition period. They're able to see the full circle of life and understand that everything is an ending and beginning, and that even within life there are many deaths and many rebirths and all these pieces that come up. And Laura does a fabulous piece in the Death Sucks workshop that we're offering together about the sacred contracts of animals. And I think this one weaves so beautifully into this particular aspect of what animals want us to know, in terms of, kind of why they're here with us and what that's about, and what their life means, for us and for others and for themselves. So yeah, this is our fourth thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Laura?
No, that was beautifully said. It was really beautifully said. Yeah, well, maybe the only other thing I want to add to that is this idea that, and we really see this in the way that animals, the circle of life is shown in the way that animals often like their bodies treated or dealt with afterwards. And I had a big realization around this as being quite a sensitive, empathic person, and driving on the roads here in Australia where there is roadkill and Kia. Yeah. And so I started to notice that in the cases where the animals were on the earth, or the carrion birds had come to eat their flesh, and the bacteria had started to create decomposition, and all of those things were happening, all those natural organic processes, that the soul was not lingering, that the soul had transitioned really easily. And I started to realize how important it was for animals to feel that sense of completion around their particles returning to the earth to be recycled. Animals are recyclers. They like recycling. They're environmentally conscious.
They're like West Coasters.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to become a tree,
Yeah.
After I pass on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We'll put a tree in you, right, and it'll grow. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Yes.
And there's something really natural about that. And obviously there are situations where that's not possible. But, that was a really interesting learning that I had around watching animals that had been killed traumatically, actually, and the way that when their body started to go into those natural processes, when their body started the recycling process, the soul was much more resolved about things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is Kia, everybody.
Hi, Kia. Ruth coming. Are you going to come up here, Ruth? We'll see. She's on the floor at the moment, but she may want to pop us on the sofa.
Yeah, Parker's on the couch.
Yeah, everyone's around.
Awesome. Okay, number 5.
Our number 5 in the last webinar was this idea that that there was kind of like a sense of common or channeled or shared wisdom that came from animals around death. And those kind of key things were to do with like an overwhelming sense of love and gratitude for the experiences they'd had. What we kind of did in the Death Sucks workshop was we actually spoke to some animals that had passed away, and also some animals that were close to passing away, and really asked them about death. And we realized that there were some kind of common truths, and that those truths were really to do with that everything is okay, that everything is complete, that there is like gratitude and love, and that they are still present in our lives. So they don't go away, they don't completely disappear, they're still actually present in our lives. And a lot of the time they're being of service in ways that that their body at the end there was not enabling them to, wasn't facilitating for them. They can come everywhere with you when they don't have that body anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. We had a veterinarian in our first class Sorry about Kia here. I just got someone outside, so she's like, I must defend the fortress. So we had this wonderful veterinarian class, and she shared that when her dog passed on, who was getting quite old and quite, I can't remember if it was arthritic or something, but, you know, not able to kind of be with her on her rounds anymore in all these places. And when she passed, there was, you know, this woman had just a distinct sense of her dog now being able to be present with her in all these places where she was not able to because of her physical constraints at that time. And I thought that was really beautiful to hear from her, was this sense of just like a real transition and transformation of the type of connection that her and her dog were able to experience together. And although I know we miss, you know, so deeply the physical connection that we have, and we're going to speak to this in a little bit with the question that Jack had, you know, that physical kind of hole that's left by a really, you know, deeply loved animal transitioning. There is always still this a connection there, and I think oftentimes, Laura, hey, it's just that sense of, can we open up to that a new type of connection, a new sort of level or understanding of connection in these places. Yeah.
And I think that really becomes then the legacy that they leave in our life, you know, and I think it is very important to our animals that, you know, all the animal lovers and all the people I visit and I speak to, the animals play such a crucial role in their life. You can't love an animal and not be changed by that. And it's about that kind of what that change leaves in our life, you know. And I think, you know, some of the stuff, I know when we talk about the traumatic death stuff, there's some stuff I want to talk about that as well, because sometimes the grief around death in general, but especially traumatic death, it kind of causes us to change what that animal meant to us. We make their legacy more about their death than their life. And so there's some interesting stuff there we can get into, and so just some kind of questions that we can ask ourselves around how we're feeling that might help shift that, so that legacy is really a beautiful one.
I love that. Yes, that's wonderful. Okay, nice. All right.
That was those were the 5 main things that we covered in the last one, and we've got some cool questions coming through and comments coming through. Did you want to get into some of the questions, Alexa?
I think what I'd like to do to start here is to open up the line to Jack again, open Jack to sort of resharing your question. Because I think that would be a really nice little soft place to begin. How's that sound? Okay. Jack, you're live.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. My question, bear with me because I'm going to just share a bit of the context. So hope we were guided 3 days before her actual transition that it would take place three days later. Everything went as normal, and you know, she just was herself all the time until the day of the transition itself. We noticed that she didn't want to eat at all, and that had us go, whoa. And I remember crying and go, it's your last meal. And the moment the words came out, it was like, oh, I want to take that back. But she just refused all the food. And the only thing that she took was Haagen-Dazs vanilla ice cream. And when I offered more, she's just go, no, that's it. She got up. Not that she got up, but she just walked away. And we don't usually like hold her. We just let her do everything that she wants to do. She just got up, walked away, went back to her mat, and just laid there. And she laid facing in. And just only, say, about 10, 15 minutes before the vet came. So during that period of time, we didn't quite know what to do. We were like, okay, do you know that is coming? And we were dealing with our own emotions. At the same time, wondering how is she feeling about this whole thing. In the meanwhile, we have taken Avante out of the house so that, Avante would bark at people. So we took her out of the house. We got her with her favorite people. And when the vet came, she hardly looked up. And she was just so allowing. It was just so shocking for me to witness this whole allowing process that in a way it was such a gift, because all that happened was just a lot of emotions coming up. I was just crying a lot. My question is that during that period of time, what's going through her mind? What's going through, what is she experiencing? I think I'm so much in my own experience. I don't quite put myself where she is. Even after I was telling some people, I never could understand why people take photographs and videos during my aunt's funeral or my grandma's funeral and things like that. I go, why are you taking all these pictures, right? But I was just so grateful that pictures were taken during Hope's transition, that when I look back now, I was going, wow, what precious time it has been, And when I look at Hope, I was just going, is there anything you wanted to say? Because I didn't ask her that question during that time. I was just, yeah. Mm-hmm. So when it was just so peaceful, we were so quick in, taking out the Hope wine bottle and, passing wine around and go, hey, here's cheers to Hope, and the jump from being so sad of letting her go to also celebrating, because I don't know how I could manage to just switch like that, or all of us who were here witnessing. And then the whole day was just, it didn't sink in anything, because we had a wake where people came and gave tribute to her, and all the way till it was time for her cremation, and we had again more ceremony, and it still didn't hit me until we came home with her in a very different form.
Yes.
And you just go, wow, that was just such a big contrast. Yeah. There's one other question that I would like to leverage on this sharing is that I mentioned that Avante went with her favorite people. Immediately after she crossed, we called them to bring her back. And Avante don't usually, mingle around Hope, but she went to Hope and she did this jump back. Like she smelled and she literally jumped back. And she immediately came to lick me and Janet, and and we were like, it's okay, we're cool. How are you? So my next question is, how are the other animals? After, before, after, what's going on with them? How can we support them? And all of that. Yeah. And thank you for listening to to that. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. I would love. Yeah. So beautiful, Jack. Thank you. Does everybody have their tissues out yet? Yeah. Okay. I would love to actually sort of see with Laura, because Laura has actually had a chance to work with Hope. So Laura, I would love to put this question of, where was Hope at during that time? Because you may even have insights of what was really going on in Hope's head at that time, or not, what was being.
And there's so much in that. So I'm going to try and remember to touch on some of the things, because I think Hope also showed us a lot of really, Hope is still teaching today. She's still teaching today. And I want to really thank her, because her story has so many common things in it that we see with animals, especially animals that are lucky enough to have people like yourselves, like everyone here that's on this call, that really listen. So, it's very common for the refusal of food to be one of the big symbols that we are done consuming life force. So all we do in our life is consume life force to convert that to energy to be here and be alive. We can't live without other life feeding us. And often animals will stop eating or refuse food when it is their time. It's also a really natural and instinctual way that they can weaken themselves so that transition is easier. So food, you know, if we eat a really big bowl of food, it really grounds us. We get a huge amount of like grounding energy. It makes us really, it like gets us out of our mind and out of our, we just Whereas during the time that animals leave their body, they're actually, a lot of the time, they're already lifting out through their higher chakras and out through the top. So eating grounds them too much when they start to go into that process. So I want to really thank Hope for not only showing us that behavior, you know, is something that she, and good on her for having a taste of ice cream. That's nice to have that.
I was going to say, what a last meal.
Sensational. Yeah, you can't resist ice cream. You can eat ice cream even when you're not. Are you going to come up here, boo-boo? So yeah, so that's like a big part of it is the refusal of food as a way of weakening the body. It was also really beautiful confirmation for you, Jack and Janet, that your timing was right.
Yeah.
You know, so it was really her engaging with that timing and saying, yes, this is the timing. And I really see that the way she went to her mat afterwards was also about that. As to what she was like feeling and during that time, you know, what popped into my mind was that she was really in a place of waiting. You know, there was nothing left incomplete. Everything was done. Everything was perfect. And she's just waiting, you know. When my Grace passed away and I knew it was time, and she'd actually refused the last meal, and I had called the vet and we had to wait overnight, and it was a bit of a sleepless night because we were both waiting. There was like an anticipation. You're about to have like, there's a birth that's going to happen, but it's the birth of the soul back into the other world rather, you know, there's an anticipation with that and a sense of like relief and celebration when it's done. And often the sadness and the loss doesn't hit us until a little while afterwards, because when we get into that period, it's like we're just waiting. Everything's done and you're just waiting. It's a very quiet waiting time. So the way that you, Jack and Janet, handled it and went through it was instinctually perfect.
Absolutely.
I would say. Yeah, instinctually perfect. I'm not sure if I've answered all the questions, but maybe Alexa, if you've got anything you want to
absolutely. So, okay, I'm just sort of sitting with that because there's a few different facets to everything there. You know, as far as that paradox that you were feeling, Jack, that, oh my God, how could I go from being so incredibly sad to celebrating like within moments? I think this, you know, I've really been noticing this more in terms of, this is a part of the existence of this like earth plane, is that we can live in paradox. We can live in joy at the same time as intense grief, and have these emotions literally like happening second to second. And it's one of the most beautiful things. And we see this like even in our animals, that they can fluctuate between emotional states in such a really beautiful flowing way, if we can kind of honor how it all wants to move, right? We talked a lot in the Death Sucks course about, you know, emotion being energy in motion. And so it has all these different qualities to it and feels, but it's still this energy that's like, oh, I want to move there, and then this is what feels right, and then I'm going to come back here, and then we're going to dive into this. And so we can, as I say, be experiencing two entirely opposite poles within moments of each other, or even at the same time in different aspects of our being. And so it's very, very natural that happens, although it feels odd when it does. It's like, how can I be all these things? And yet we are. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's the right time.
Hello, Nana. So that's that part of it. I hope that helps. And then as far as the other animals, this is something that I think both me and Laura have worked quite a bit with, because we're brought in after the fact in terms of helping to balance balance the tribe, balance the matrix after, there has been this change. And it really depends on what that change has been. So for example, I'm going to use the example of Laura and I worked with a horse named Fancy. We told the story in the last webinar, and her transition was very, very, she was very ready again, refused food, showed us a lot of different signs that she was like, okay, I'm good, ready. We did a beautiful ceremony, and then she passed. And there was nothing that needed to be done there for the rest of the herd. They got to go and stand over the body. They knew what was happening. They went through the process. Just like you allow Devante to go and see Hope after, that's a really powerful piece, because she gets to go, oh. And Devante is really interesting because she came straight to you and goes, how are you? Are you okay? Oh my gosh, right? That's her thing, right? She's like, oh, wow, this is big. Are you okay? And this is very dog consciousness, whereas horses will go into herd dynamic and go, they'll start processing and licking, chewing, yawning, doing, okay, how do we rebalance, right? How do we rebalance the herd? And so in the same family, after Fancy died, her half brother died, but quite tragically. And I had to go in at that point and rebalance the herd. He was the head of the herd. He was the alpha, and the rest of the herd were not allowed to see him after he passed. Because the husband felt uncomfortable with that. And so that was a really different experience than with Fancy passing. And I actually went in and did a bunch of balancing with that herd to help them transition past there, because they were stuck. And they didn't, and Zippo, because it was a tragic passing, we're going to get into this in a second, was stuck as well. He was in limbo. So that was also something that I helped with at that point to help him move. And what was really interesting though, as that shifted after that session, I went back the week later and that was all clear. And then one of the horses who had been sort of back burner horse forever and ever and ever stepped up and said, hey, ready to step up as herd boss. Can you help me? So I did a big session on him, Dudley, and that was really amazing because he'd never ever let me do body work on him. I've been working on their horses for over 10 years. And he finally went, hey, I'm ready. Wow. So just this shift in dynamic, right? He was able to actually step into that role. It was a very powerful moment. And we were like, and he stood without halter or lead rope while I did a bunch of body work on him and just head down to the floor, blowing and completely involved and ready. So amazing. You just never know how the pieces are gonna change.
And it's so important, isn't it, to allow the other animals, so I think sometimes it's a very human thing. We want to protect the other animals from death or the body or all of those things. But actually the grieving process is easier if we face it and acknowledge it, And sometimes the animals won't choose to go up and check out, they actually won't go and have a look. I know when Grace passed away, Ruby and Toby, my cat, were both in the room with her right up until the time she passed. And the cat, the moment she had gone, the moment the vet had the moment the life had left her body, the cat just went, okay, I'm leaving now, and just left the room and never even had like a moment about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ruby wants you all to know that she loves it now that Grace has died. Because she's a princess in a good way, but like this is her moment, and like Dudley, like totally. The wall, like Dudley, totally. Like sometimes when someone makes space, and that's only like the circle of life, but
absolutely.
She loves it. It's like it's all about her now, and she doesn't want me to get a puppy, and it's all look at her. She's as smug as anything.
You are, Ruby.
Yeah. So, and it's been a really awesome chapter for her. And, and they did love each other, but she thinks it's great.
Yeah.
So, there's all kinds of cool.
Totally.
Yes. There's all kinds of cool stuff that happens.
That's awesome. And I really wanted to honor, I'm seeing the chat here, and I really want to thank Michelle for your sharing. There's some really beautiful pieces here, and thank you for that in the chat, and for everybody that's tuning in there. So that's wonderful. I'd love to, dive into this piece around tragic death, because I think we've kind of segued a little bit here. I'm feeling that we're kind of getting to this space of like being ready to go there, and this is such a huge one for many of us, whether it's a person that we lose tragically, or an animal, or even something that happens in our life really suddenly. It can be
something that's traumatic, and
right. Yeah, incredibly jarring. What we need to realize, Laura just used the perfect word, is it's so shocking, jarring, and we really want to speak to this today, because we've been kind of chatting about this over the last couple of days, and there's a lot to it. So do you want to sort of begin this conversation, Laura?
Yeah. And, Alexa and I spoke about this a little bit before, because I know it's one of the hardest questions, is trying to make sense of something that is so tragic, so traumatic, something that seems like it is so out of the blue, where an animal has not had a good death, or has not had a chance to live a full life. And Alexa and I spoke at length about it, and I think we've both got some kind of slightly different things to contribute around it. And what Alexa said was so beautiful. It was about the really allowing yourself to grieve and to honor the fact that it is deeply upsetting. And I'll let you speak to that a little bit. Yeah. It was such a great question last time, because I kind of went back to the drawing board, and I did a little bit of communication work, and I asked the animals, because I don't know if some of you that know me know that just before I got into doing my healing work, I lost a little whippet in a traumatic way. He was hit by a car or a truck up on the highway. It took me a while to find him, and he was only 2 years old, and it was exceptionally difficult. I can't tell you how pissed off I was at the world, with God, with the universe, you name it. And so he's one of my guides that I work with, and I actually spoke to him about this. I said, what is one of the things, if there's anything good, if there's anything of value that comes out of traumatic death, what is it? And what he said to me, or the message that came through, was that it makes us aware of a karmic agreement that we have made with the universe. So it will bring up and make us consciously aware of a karmic agreement that we've made with the universe, maybe before, maybe in another lifetime, maybe it's in our DNA. And these are the big blocks that get in the way of us being fully present, and being fully powerful, and being fully loving and emotionally vulnerable in our lives. So, if I'm sure all of us have had some kind of trauma, whether we've been unlucky enough to have a traumatic death. But I look back on what I said, and actually I said, I will never have another dog.
Mm-hmm. No,
not doing it. Can never be hurt that way again. Can never experience that kind of pain again. And it was a massive, it was also, in a way, it was a refusal for me to deal with other grief that I had from my family, and the dog energy is about family and about our tribe and about our tribe of origin. And I had this complete, it was a promise that I made to the universe. Thankfully, Ruby came along. She actually turned up on Julian, who was the little whippet I lost. She turned up on his birthday. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that know Ruby, you know her cool little story about how she came to be with me. But thankfully, it was something that was triggered for me to heal. It was something that was triggered for me to heal. And but a lot of us have these very big, deep promises that we made in anger with the universe, that are triggered around trauma, things like I will never love again, this is all my fault, I can't do anything right, you name it, I don't belong, I will never find anyone that loves me like this again, like all these really big, powerful promises that we make in anger with the universe. And what actually happens is that we get defiant and we carry those around with us. And that is sometimes one of the big gifts that losing an animal in tragic circumstances, that feeling that trauma, it brings it to the surface for us. So what are the promises that we have entered into in anger with the universe that actually block us from having what we want? So we can become aware of those. Yeah. It's not always easy to, it's not always easy. There's a process. But at least if we have the awareness of it, then it's something that we can work towards healing. And sometimes we're carrying more than one of those big ones, and if we can manage to take that traumatic experience and work through it, and I think what you're going to speak to now, Alexa, is a little bit like the working through of that process. The gift on the other side of that is a kind of emotional freedom that those animals are rejoicing when we rediscover.
Yeah.
Years ago, I couldn't even talk about Julian without, I just couldn't talk. My throat would close up. Because I was so angry and so sad. And I still have tears. Yeah. But I know that I made a bullshit promise to the universe and I've had to work through that. So, and it's been immensely valuable to do that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And yeah. So there's all these aspects. And I think that's so important for us to realize, life is like a freaking layer cake, and it's not always chocolate and wonderful. You know what I'm saying? It's like layers of just terrible stuff in there.
And stuff that ain't even food.
Right? And I think really there's all these pieces, so we can see the bigger picture, like Laura was talking about, and that's amazing. But we can also, it's also super, super important for us to be with our humanness in it, which is what Laura discussed. I am fucking mad. I feel guilty. I feel devastated. There is just deep, deep, deep emotion that comes up around tragedy, and also that piece around feeling shocked, so deeply shocked to our soul about what's happened that it is really, really hard to even go into the processing. I would ask Laura, it probably took you a while before you could even look into that door. Hey,
it took me years.
Yeah.
I think Ruby showed up 18 months after he died.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I went, oh shit, I'm going to have to look at this.
Yeah.
And, it took a really long time. And, I felt guilty. I felt ashamed. I felt it was my fault. There was so many reasons why I wanted to deny myself ever feeling that kind of love and connection again.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to work through it.
Absolutely. And again, coming back to that second point of it's not your fault. This is a big, and it's totally, it's going to be impossible to swallow at the beginning, as Laura shared, but continuously bringing that in, and that's a part of the process. Is okay, let's eventually look behind this door and what's going on. And at this point, I think there's a couple of key things. I think one of the biggest ones is finding support and help at this time. This is not a journey that we're meant to go through alone, although we are tempted to do so, especially when we feel guilty, especially when we feel in so much shock and that the emotion is so, so great. And it's one of the reasons,
it's an animal.
Right?
When it's an animal, I fucking went to work the next day because I was like, I can't call my boss and say my dog just died, and we feel alone because we don't think anyone's going to get it.
Yeah, totally. And so it was one of the reasons I wrote the book, and it was also one of the reasons why me and Laura went, hey, do you think that we might be able to put this workshop on, because to have a venue to share around these pieces and to actually move through them in this way is powerful. And otherwise we might keep that door closed for a very, very long time, if not forever. And we never get to unpack the gift that that animal actually brought to us with their life, right? Even if it was a very short one, even if it was just 2 years, I bet at like all the money that dog brought so much gift in those 2 years.
Huge.
Right?
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now.
There we go.
Yeah.
Right? So to be able to actually, to get the gift, we have to go through that super messy, terrible place. And a big part of that is having the community to go through that with. You're not meant to do it alone. It's not a journey that you should do alone. And to have a community that understands what you're moving through and what that feels like and why it is so big for you. And they're not going to say something absolutely dumbass like it's just a dog or something like that, because it's absolutely, so much more than that. And so that's my, in terms of my contribution, it's like getting to the ground level and recognizing this is going to be hard. It's not going to be a walk through the park. It's not going to be the same as losing, not to say that it's not challenging to lose an animal that in old age, but we do have an anticipatory grief period that we can go through, understanding that there is going to be passing at some point. When it's a tragic death, we don't get that time. It's just a cutoff. And so when I've connected with these animals, and I'd love to hear your some of your pieces around this. So you've already shared around your beautiful dog, Laura, but when I've connected with these animals, so for example, with this horse that passed last week, he had a very fast colic and he was put down, he had a twist in the gut, and he was in limbo land. He was like, what just happened? Okay, so this does happen with our animals where they're like, excuse me, I'm not sure where I am right now. So with those tragic circumstances, that can sometimes happen. And so to help them, across is important at those times if necessary. And like Laura said, often, like with the roadkill on the side of the road, a part of that is going back to the earth. That's when they go. I've rarely gone past roadkill that hasn't transitioned when they've started to actually like go back into the cycle again. So it often does happen naturally, but it might take a little bit longer. And as well, as we talked about earlier, the herd, the pack, the family around that animal takes longer to transition, and there might be like a sticky place or somewhere where they just can't get past without a little bit of support, a little bit of a catalyst. Would you like to share on that, Laura?
Yeah, definitely. It's a shock for everyone, and often the soul energy is still present, and and I guess the one thing that I would say to empower all of you is you don't need to be like a spiritual healer or an animal communicator to make a difference in that situation.
Absolutely.
All it takes is your empathy and your presence, and there is no reason that you can't just connect with and speak to that soul and reassure them. Just reassure
Absolutely.
them and let them know what's happened, reassure them. They can hear you, they understand you, they know what's going on. And often just that little bit of, rather than it just everyone being like, just that little bit of quiet and calm and connection and love is all it takes for things to begin to shift as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I've seen it, just little nudges, right, to help. And that does require us to come back to ourselves, to ground, to do our self-care, to come back into a place of really being back with ourselves, being back in presence with our family, and then to sit in empathy about what's going on as well, which can be hard sometimes to retrieve ourselves from the experience at hand at that moment, but it is possible. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much we can do, and there's so, like, and I've just seen even things come back about, you know, like, you know, when the moments that you kind of realize that they're really gone. You know, there is, even in a gentle, yes, even in a gentle death, even in a death that's expected and in old age, it takes us a while to really, like, process the fact that something that has been present in our lives for so long is no longer physically present.
Totally.
We have that if we move the furniture around. We have that if we, you know, like, you look through the wardrobe for that dress. You're like, I'm sure I had that. You don't really remember throwing it out. It's just, it was there and then it's gone, you know. And especially when there's such a big emotional member of your family, such a huge presence, it takes a long time to process that they're gone. And that's where, like, the burial rituals or the funeral rituals, which is stuff we don't do a lot with our animals, or we feel a little bit inhibited about. It was so beautiful that Jack shared that they did, that they had, like,
So
wake.
lovely.
All of that is so vital to making the grieving process easier. And we know that instinctually when we grieve for humans, but we don't always follow those same rituals, and we don't always do the ceremony when we lose our animals. It's never too late to do the ceremony. Ceremonies are powerful.
Yeah.
You can create them yourself. We talk a little bit about that in the Death Sucks workshop as well, and we do a lot of stuff that has ceremonial kind of connotations to it, or, you know, that's unique and personal, as a way of, like you said, coming back to center, being present, not being afraid to be vulnerable in those moments, and feel the things that you need to feel. Oh, you're right, Rue. She's just got off the phone. And, you know, and so those ceremonies are important. And, you know, I remember when I put Grace in the ground, and we actually had like a lunar eclipse or so anyway, I can't remember. It was one of the eclipses. It was pretty cool. The light was pretty wild, and I was burying her, and I totally had, like, the moment where I was, like, you know, up to my knees and arms in mud and dirt, and I was wailing at the moon going, why, you know. And I think you've got to do that. You've got to do that. I really thank you for everybody that shared about those moments, because we've got to go through them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I want to make sure that we touch on all these questions tonight. I know we tend to go over time, but we'll just be a few more minutes here. So if you can stay with us. But I think they do really work with this. So Valletta, you shared that your cat had passed in a tragic circumstance that you felt was your fault. And I wonder if, when this happens, if they know it's an accident. I would say, yes, definitely. They absolutely know. Our animals are, I don't even know if forgiveness is the right term. That's kind of what we have to bring to ourselves around this, but they're so deeply, what would be the word here, Laura? Do you have something for me?
Yeah, like, I feel like animals find it less difficult to process or understand the chaos of the universe. You know, I think human beings, one of the main differences between human consciousness on the spectrum, you know, I talk a lot about these different frequencies and what that contains. And human beings, one of the key things is that we modify the environment. We control the environment. We change things. We build things. We exert our control over things. And so for us, it's very difficult to understand that we are not responsible for everything and that shit just happens, because when shit happens, we go, yeah, but, you know, when the storm comes, we can build a shelter. Or when this, you know, and we feel like we in some way have this ability to exert control. And animals understand more naturally, more deeply, that there's some shit you just can't control. Sometimes stuff just happens.
Yeah.
Because they are a lot more in that flow anyway in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
They're a lot less in control of their lives. It's one of the things we often feel bad for. Oh, I'm so sorry that you don't control who you get sold to or what home you end up in. And for us, this idea of not being in control is a deep struggle. And for them, it's like they're way more cruisy about it. And the same is true even in tragic circumstances.
Yeah. That's so helpful, Laura. That's helpful for me too. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Something I've been exploring a lot lately is like, is where, like, you know, in our naturalness as human beings, where our power lies. And actually one of the powers that we have is that we can change the environment. We can use that for manifestation, but we can also use it in a pathological way. And the human race has been using it in a pathological way, but there is a natural way of being able to change the environment that is healthy for us and is powerful for us. So if you want to change something in your life, and this is, you know, we spoke a little bit about, I think one of the articles we wrote about, like, you know, in the grieving process, having a beautiful photo framed or making a little shrine to your animal is a way that you change your environment. When you change your environment externally, you also change it internally. You're going to shift and heal something internally. So those little rituals and processes are really, really helpful. And it's one of the things we as humans can do.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. That's so clarifying. And I wanted to speak to Juanita's question. When an animal just goes through his day and then goes to sleep and doesn't wake up, does he know the transition is coming? And what are some of the reasons he does not give any indication? So I just want to speak to this as our kind of final question here. Yeah. So
sounds like a lovely death.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, this would be ideal, and it's quite amazing, especially for cats. Is this a cat, Juanita? It's a dog. Okay, excellent. Well, that's cool. Because oftentimes dogs won't tend to pass of their own avail. Do you find that, Laura?
Sorry, cats want to pass. Yeah, cats seem to be, of all the species I've worked with, they seem to be the ones that most want to do it on their own as a species. And often they will, not so much when you're living in apartments. I know in Singapore, your cats really don't get to go outside and stuff, but like in Australia and Canada, cats will just disappear. They don't give you the choice. They leave well before you've even thought about, well, maybe they're a bit unwell. Maybe I should take them to they're gone.
Yep.
They actually just take themselves away because they're going to go into a deep process. I think cats know things about transition processes, about leaving the body, about things like astral travel, and also about healing processes where they often take themselves away to heal. That it's pretty mind-blowing, and they don't like human interference in that too much.
Yeah, they're Jedis, so they need to just do their own thing. Yeah, oftentimes. Yeah. And they will be in your space just balancing it out all the time, just so you know. for their own enjoyment more than anything else. Creating a zen environment. So that's why they also say cats are really lovely to have around. But with dogs, it's actually quite rare, Juanita, more rare, I found, for dogs to transition on their own, and it's quite a beautiful thing when they do, because it means that they feel absolutely safe and comfortable in their space and with you, and they're actually really, really connected to a side of even their nervous system and a calm that allows them to actually overcome the typical kind of resilience that would keep a body around for a really, really, really long time. This is why in humans we tend to last a lot longer than might be considered, a quality of life, because we have this sort of this resilience that happens where the body, the reptilian brain wants to survive. And so for me, when that happens, it can be a really beautiful thing that they made that choice and just had a peaceful passing in this way. So that's my sense of it. I think there's another piece here, Laura, so I want to pass it.
Well, and I'm just also wondering about, especially if it's going to sleep at nighttime, because there is that window in the meridians as well where like people that work in hospital wards, nurses that work in hospital wards, and we don't see this as much with animals, because I think a lot of the time the people that are in hospital wards on palliative care, if they were animals, they might have already been euthanized. But there is a window as well where I can't remember if it's the heart or the lung meridian. I think it's the lung meridian is at its weakest ebb. And so it's in the natural cycle of the day. It's also a really powerful time for the soul to free itself from the body.
Yeah.
So it's actually it's like an easy window. And they reckon the percentages of deaths that happen in that window are quite high, or the highest. And so what we're seeing is, again, we're seeing natural deaths in those scenarios. And so we're seeing that there is a little bit of a pattern about when natural deaths are easiest and what needs to happen next.
Beautiful.
And I get the sense that that's possibly something that's happened with Juanita's dog as well. There's,
Yeah, absolutely. And in my sense, Juanita, the reason why he may not have given an indication is he may not have known that was what was happening. But the body actually kind of takes the reins a little bit there and goes, yeah, we're complete now. So it would be interesting to do some touching in with him and just to see what's going on for him and things, because it's always that sort of balance between the spirit self and sort of the knowing self, and then where the body's at as well. So but
we don't know everything that our body knows. Like I don't know how to produce hormones and digest food and do all that stuff. My body knows that, and I'm blissfully ignorant. So, same is true with animals. It's I actually even just had a question the other day from someone that wanted an animal communication session, and they said, "Oh, my horse has had this lameness, and I want to know if they're going to be sound again." And I said, "Well, if you just had an operation on your leg and you're wondering if would you have the answer to that?"
Yeah,
you don't. You'd be like, I don't know. I hope so. But sometimes the body knows things about processes that are going on that the like conscious mind doesn't, or the kind of I call it the personality level doesn't. Yeah.
Perfect. So
there was another one about that and I know we're going over time, so if people need to jump off, I totally understand. But there was that other question, Alexa, about being like the timing and about not being present when the soul leaves. So, a lot of the time we sit in like death watch and we're present, and that's the other thing that can sometimes happen with going to sleep as well. I think when everyone's asleep, there's not the sort of the hand holding at the bedside or the stroking and the soothing happening. And so it's like it's a private time.
Yeah.
And the force of the love of the family and of the other beings around, and I think this is one of the reasons why cats do sometimes choose to take themselves away, is that dying is like a deeply private process. And, we always say we enter the world alone and we leave the world alone. And none of us obviously like the idea of our animals dying alone. And that's why we sit with them and we're present to them. But often, if we leave them for a few moments, they will choose those few moments to breathe their last.
Yeah.
And I think it's because the force of your love, the anchor of your love and your connection is no longer holding them. So they can go. And I think that's something that they see a lot in hospitals as well. So a lot of the time you'll have like bedside vigil with an elderly patient in a hospital, and the moment the room is empty and it's maybe only 5 minutes, people go off to get a cup of tea and they come back and the soul has gone, because they finally just had that little moment where they're not present to you anymore and they leave.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. And so, wow, we did go over time. I hope I know it was worth it for me. Wow, lots.
I just want to read. I'm just sorry. I just want to read. I've just seen this comment that Michelle made, and I think it's about the animals' lives are cut short. And I know she's into her essential oils, and I know there's people on the call that love their essential oils. And she says that these relationships are a concentrated relationship, like an essential oil. Yeah.
Yeah. I did see that earlier. Thank you. That's great. Yeah. And they're potent, right? They're potent.
Really potent and medicinal for the soul.
Yes.
But it's sometimes a little bit of a bitter medicine to take.
Absolutely. Wow. So thank you everybody for being present here. This is not an easy topic. So we really, really appreciate you being, staying with us, because I can really feel how with us you are. And that's just such a beautiful thing. And I just really want to honor that. And I, Laura and I, we want to share. Oh, hello, Tasha's dog.
No.
Oh, is it cute?
Oh, and Goldie. I was just going to say, I want to really acknowledge you, because I know so many, like I've seen faces on the call. I know that you guys are sitting in that space at the moment with your animals, and it's really brave of you. It's a really vulnerable and brave place to be kind of still emotionally plugged into.
Totally. Yeah.
Grief and
Yeah, for sure. And we just
and
they're more friends. Oh,
yeah.
It's so great.
I've really felt the cats on the call today.
Totally did.
Cat energy. Yeah.
You see Parker was sitting there for a while, just
I know, doing the whole profile thing.
Totally. Am I not so handsome? I'm so
handsome. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Laura and I want to share. I am coming over. I'm coming to Singapore. I'm coming to Perth, and we are co-teaching Death Sucks, the workshop and the masterclass in February. And I will include some links to that in the replay email that I send out. If this does feel like work that calls you, we call ourselves and the people that have moved through this course transition stewards, and we really feel deeply about this being a really important journey for us as animal lovers and stewards, because it is something that we're going to be moving through potentially many times in our lifetime. And if we are professionals or holding space on this level, we'll be moving through quite a few more times than that. So I would encourage you, if it feels like a call, to go on, check it out. I would love to meet you all when I come over. I've met some of you. I'll include that. And if there is any other questions or concerns that come up or anything after this call, please don't hesitate to reach out. The email that I sent all the information about today's call from, you can just press reply and you get directly to me, and I'll reach out to Laura as well. And today it's tonight here, so but today we would encourage major self-care. So drink a glass of water, maybe get your journal out, take some deep full breaths, go out in nature if you can, cuddle your little loved ones, your furry beings or non-furry beings, and do the things that help you to just fully come back to yourself. Yes, we were chatting throughout this call, but we were into some big, deep stuff. So honor that throughout, today, that there's going to be some shifties and shakies going on within your being today around this. Yeah. Anything you want to share on that, Laura?
No, I think that was perfect, beautifully said. And I know that, as we kind of wrap up, I'm just seeing Taja's got a couple of questions that have come up. Like, I'm happy to stay on for a little while, or what do you think we should do with those questions, Alexa?
Absolutely. What I might do is stop the recording. So that it's a little, a smaller portion, and then we can just stay on. And if anybody wants to stay on and listen in, we want to honor your time. We've already gone over, so we'll do that. I think, does that feel okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine with me. And then if there are questions that are really valuable, we, between now and the time that you're in Perth and Singapore, we may have time for another webinar as well. Then we might.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now. So appreciate if you're watching the replay tonight and you're getting this information, and you don't have to leave the call right away. I'm just stopping the recording. So thank you. And have a wonderful day. And I hope to be seeing you in a little bit, perhaps. That would be wonderful in February. Okay.